As you know, this is the last presentation this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to end it in a fight, if possible, right? So yeah, the subject today is like best practices, and not necessarily the best practices themselves, but when not to do them, right? Does anyone here who here likes best practices? Okay. Who doesn't? No one? No, I'm the only one that doesn't like best practices. Like, it's not that I love them too, right? So it's like it's not I don't only not like them. I also like them sometimes, but sometimes I'm not, right? So maybe a couple of things about me first. So I have been I was the consultant for a lot of the time. I had a developer there, so I was well, not development, but like something developer. And I really just worked with engineers, right? So a lot of time, my job was we got the spec and we just implement it, and everything has to be done correctly, right? But then I moved on, well, not necessarily on, but sideways maybe. And then I just had to work with actual people that had requirements. I don't know who here works with directly with the client. Like as a developer working directly with the client, right? They don't know what they want. When do they know what they want, right? And it's really, really hard to plan things like best practices when you have an environment where you would come in on Monday at work and like half of the features that you were working on are no longer needed, or they have to be something else, right? So you have just literally drop everything that you had on your current tree, move on to something else, or just switch everything or stuff like that. And that's not easy to work with, and it's really hard to go with the best practices in that case. And then, it's kind of hard to love them at that point, right? Because they are making your life harder, right? Because no one is asking that except you and your inner developer core, right? So I love best practices, right? They're nice. I mean, why wouldn't you love best practices, right? So they lead to good software, right? They're nice. They make development easier. They make your job just more standardized. You don't have to worry about what you're going to do next, right? You have nice maintainable code usually. Some really really maybe smart people thought about how you should implement them, what you should do during a development project, and they lead to nice projects and they lead to extensible software, right? You don't get to really, really bad bits of code and stuff like that where you can't just extend it anymore, or it costs too more to extend stuff. You get fewer bugs. Everything is nice, right? Am I right or not? Yeah. Okay, but they also come with some costs at some point, right? Which in a normal development project usually don't matter. So they're usually initial costs, right? So you have to invest some time in implementing them, right? You want automatic deployments, automatic testing. You have to spend time implementing them. You have to spend time building the infrastructure, maybe, right? You have to train people. I don't know who here ever tried to convince a developer to do something. Yeah, was it easy? Convince your team that you should do something somewhere, somehow else. Yeah, I see. Yeah, you see. Yeah, it's hard to convince them, right? You have to train them. It basically just takes time, right? And yeah, you need infrastructure, you need investments in some things. And some projects, at least some projects I've been working on, people just don't want that. They have a project that lasts maybe a month. Why would they spend stuff on automatic deployment? What's the point of testing, right? They just want a demo for something. Okay, so when can then we ignore best practices? Does anyone care to answer? No? Well, the answer is never really, right? So even if we have, at least not never, so it's a never with an asterisk, right? It's never, but never completely. So even though if you give up a lot of stuff, right, you should still maintain some of it. Like for example, code style should always have it, right? Okay, you might not have tests, but you will always have a standardized way of developing things. You will always have like user acceptance testings. You will always have some level of like standardization in your work, or some level of like sanity really is still needed, right? But then I can tell you now a time where we actually went consciously against what, for example, at the time we were upgrading an Angular 1 application to an Angular 2 application. And we consciously went and said, okay, we won't be doing what like the best practices stuff says we should do. Right? And I can go through my reasons, and if you guys have something to comment about that, I'm happy to hear it. Maybe we can start a fight between you two, or this between us, right?
Or a discussion.
Yeah, or a discussion. Yeah, okay, so low-level fight. Yeah. So what we had to do. This was about 1 year ago, working for a customer. We had been developing an application, an Angular 1 application. That was about 90,000 lines of code, somewhere about that. We were working for about 2 years since then. We only had 2 developers, so we had 2 UI guys at least. Everything was written in Angular 1 and JavaScript. So no fancy stuff. We didn't have Webpack. We just had a grunt command that like, took everything and spit it out in a file. It was all great. It was working. But the customer wasn't really happy. We wanted to move to Angular 2 because he wanted to hire some other people and some other stuff. Basically, he wanted to go to Angular 2. But at the same time, he wanted to have it done. So 0 downtime. Basically, we should have switched between the two at any point, and no one would have noticed. As fast as possible. Actually, we had a presentation, a conference at the time, and it had to be done for the conference. But at the same time, he wanted to have actual features done for the conference, and as cheap as possible, of course. So we couldn't spend. Oh yeah, we'll just like do it and. We just hire 5 more people and do it in a month, and then it's going to be done, and yay, everything is happy, right? But usually reality is not like that. So especially if you work in a consultancy development where you actually have like a client paying you personally for like this amount of days, and he wants to get as much as possible for those amount of days. So what can we do? We made a checklist. Basically, if you go through the migration guide in the website that Angular has, they have a really, really nice guide to upgrading from Angular 1 to Angular 2. It explains, so basically, you should have already followed the AngularJS code style, Angular 1, which we kind of did. So basically, you should have like just one component per file, just basically have modularization in general, right? So you shouldn't have like just one big file with the entire application. Which we kind of did. So we had like everything was kind of in separate folders. The features were like self-contained. The dependencies were all right. They weren't great, but they were all right. Then you should like switch to a module loader, which, as I said before, we really weren't going to do. So we already have 90,000 lines of code with like hundreds of components. We weren't about to go like to each file and then switch to like TypeScript and then switch to like using system.js or something like to load the code. It was like that was never going to happen, right? And besides that, we still had some issues with some Angular 2 libraries that weren't quite working. So like the check marks is what we had. So we had use component directives. They were introduced in Angular 1.7, I think. So where you can have like just not directed that component. Changes some of the semantics in there, but nothing fancy, right? So just have like the basic structure done. The thing is, like those two things, so using a module loader and migrating to TypeScript, as much as I love it, it's really, really hard to sell to a client. Especially in that case, we had 2 developers, in which time had to actually develop new features and still do the migration. And yeah.
Hard to sell or hard to implement?
It's hard to sell as a cost. No. So it wasn't hard to implement. It was like time-consuming to implement.
Okay.
Right. So it wasn't like, it's not difficult. It wouldn't have been difficult for us to switch to TypeScript, but we estimated like 2 weeks of for each of. So basically 1 man month spent on migrating from AngularJS to AngularJS with TypeScript and module loaders. So 2 weeks, 1 man month for them, with no feature development, with no any kind of progress for the business side, because also they had to present their stuff further. It was just not gonna get approved, right? But they still wanted to move, which is kind of great. Personally, I like TypeScript. I like Angular 2 more than Angular 1. I really wanted to have that move done, right? But in that case, you really can't follow the guide. It's really hard to sell, literally sell that, right? Because I would have to sell myself working for them for a month, basically, just to do something that they wouldn't see any difference in, as an end user. They would see a difference as developers, because we also had developers from their side, but yeah, they weren't the ones that were deciding stuff. So, okay, so what were our choices, right? So just follow the best practices and try to sell that to the customer, in which case we would have failed. I'm thinking we would have failed. I had just a short discussion with the customer, and he was like, how much time? Like 2 weeks for 2 people? Like the entire UI? Like, maybe we can find a different solution. So we actually did something else, right? As it turns out, we did it the bad way. But this is another thing. When you go against like the common knowledge and the common best practices that you would see used, if you work with a client at least, or a project manager, get the approval of someone that's in charge, right? That's my only rule that I have. Like when you can actually just forget about best practices, right? Just speak with someone in charge, explain to them what the costs are if you do it that way, and if they agree to that cost, then you're basically off the hook. You did your job as a developer. You're like, at least morally you're off the hook, not necessarily like, well, not like the way the customer maybe see it, but you can at least for myself I can sleep easy if I know that okay, the customer knows what he agreed to, he knows what he gets, and he's gonna get just that. So what we did, actually we just never ever just moved away from the Angular 1 project. As it turns out, the Angular 2, this is a snippet of the AngularJS, so the configuration for an Angular 2 project. You can just import scripts, like literally just JavaScript in there. And it works, it's fine. So it's just literally like a script, whatever script you want to import there, just import it. In our case, it was an entire Angular 1 application. So, but you don't actually need like web, like all the stuff that like Angular 2 comes with, you know, like module loaders and like modularity and stuff. No, you can just like a minify.js file, you can just import it and it's going to work just fine, right? What we ended up here because of this, like this ccom.ui file also has an Angular 1 script in it. So the entire, it's like everything is minified in there, vendor, everything stuff. And we basically ended up, because we still wanted to import the Angular 2 version, like the Angular, well, we want to import Angular 1 in Angular 2 using module loaders and stuff, that's nice. But we still wanted to have it in the script, so we just ended up with 2 versions of the Angular 1 script. I know, it's so awful. So it's like, just like, we literally made a Franken app, right? Just like take like everything that's in Angular 1, import it, doesn't matter. So that's basically it. Oh, and the CSS, of course. Which, funny thing, we use less in Angular 1 and SAS in Angular 2, which was even better. But what this allows you to do, right? So it allows you to bypass everything that's in the guide. That's like the 2 main points. Just using a module loader and going to TypeScript, because it doesn't matter. In the end, all the TypeScript code is JavaScript. If you can just load it as JavaScript, and the Angular 2 application is going to be presumably JavaScript at some point, it's going to be fun. And then what you can do, as it turns out, you can just make providers. So you can get the Angular 1 we can get the Angular 1 stuff. In case you didn't know, the Angular 2, who here works with Angular 2? Yeah. Did you know that you don't actually need like classes and types for dependency injection? Yeah. So basically, you can just use strings. So the @inject stuff. The reason actually usually you don't use that. You can just do private and some name and then some type, and Angular 2 will figure out based on the class token what it should inject in there. But you can just actually just do strings. You can just add @inject in somewhere, and it's just gonna happily inject whatever you provide for that string. In our case, for example, we provided the Angular 1, Angular UI router. There's the UI router state params, or the UI any kind of Angular 1 service. Basically, that if you have a service in Angular 1, or any kind of value actually in Angular 1, you can just provide it that way, and it works. Yeah.
Sorry, the first part is how you do it without TypeScript and...
No. Both are how we do it without TypeScript. So what you have is like this part. You need to compare this part somewhere in a module. That's what this says, right? For this string, right? Call this method to get what you should inject. That's all. And then when I want to inject that string, just add the decorator. That's it. It works. We don't need to. Usually, in this case, you would have had like a TypeScript class for the Angular 1 file, and it would know that we should import it from somewhere, and it would automatically provide. It's not automatically provided in this case, but it would know that it should automatically provide if you have all the types and all the classes, but it's not actually needed. So it's bad in this case. If you change, if you have a service in Angular 1, and you change its name for some reason, everything in Angular 2 breaks, and you wouldn't know. Because what we had to do, because we had two apps, we still had two builds. So we actually had, for the same project, we had one Angular 1 build, and when that was done, we would build Angular 2 and just use the other one as a dependency. So
was exactly Angular 2 or a newer version?
It was, I think, 5 something. But since then, we upgraded to, I think, up to 7.
Does that thing with injection still works?
Yeah. I think that's in there since, like, I think, version 2 of Angular 2, something like that, or version 4. So, if you have even an older app, it would work. What might not work is the this part. Yeah, this is actually part of the Angular upgrade framework. But again, you don't actually need don't need stuff. You don't need types. You don't need everything. You can just, instead of giving types in there at the super part, you can just give it a string for something that the Angular 1 injector knows how to inject. And apparently it works. So we just tested it and saw that it's not really documented anywhere, but we tested it and it works. And again, yeah, it's not best practices. We use stuff that's probably maybe gonna break, who knows. But the client knew that. Right? So he really wanted to move to Angular 2. He got an Angular 2 migration. So this is how you would actually upgrade a component directive. Again, we had to do disable TS-lint for some stuff because we had some really nice TS-lint rules that said that you had to have prefixes for a lot of stuff, but we disabled TS-lint rules because it was inconvenient. It was inconvenient to change the entire application in some parts to use new elements, but it works. If you want to go the other way around, right? So if you have an Angular 2 service and you still want to use it in Angular 1, which is actually a case for us. In this case, we have a configuration service which was originally in Angular 1 written, but then we needed it in Angular 2, and we didn't want to have at least some level of sanity. We didn't want to have two different versions of the same code. We said, we would have to build it in Angular 2, and then we would have to provide it for Angular 1. And this is actually the standard way of doing it. There's nothing non-best practice about this. You just basically create an Angular 1 module, and this is actually just so this is basically just Angular 1 code. You just make a module, make a factory with whatever service you want to have in there, and Angular 1 is not going to complain. As long as the module is going to be in the injector at the right time, which is quite important, yeah, it's just going to use it. In the end, it's still just JavaScript. If it calls some methods from the other side, and actually, this is quite nice because in here we use like getters and quite like fancy features from Angular 2, and they still work in JavaScript. So we had like not like method calls, but fields and stuff. And if you want to downgrade full components, we can still do it. In this case, we have like a tile component, and we can have actual imports and stuff. So they would translate between Angular 1 and Angular 2. It's not like you would have just like this closed box where you just have like the Angular 1 stuff and Angular 2 stuff. You have them quite separate. Not quite separate, we have them intertwined. Right? So you could actually like send observer events from Angular 2 to Angular 1. You can send notifications from Angular 1 and Angular 2 and stuff like that. So it works like clicks and stuff work, which is a surprisingly a nice way of doing it. So you need to what you need to learn is, for example, like you have title I18N there. If you used it in Angular 2, it's remained like that. If it's in Angular 1, you need to add a dash and lowercase. So like camel casing still works between the two, which is quite strange, but it does. So what we actually ended up with. So we ended with a Franken app, which still runs today. I don't think they got rid of, we moved on from the project, but I don't think they got rid of the Angular 1 part. We had basically two builds with two different technologies. So we had like Grunt, and then we had the nice Angular build. Both AngularJS and Angular. We still had to, at some point, develop features in AngularJS, but it allowed us, because we had moved so quickly. So the entire transition from Angular 1 to Angular 2, it took about a day. So instead of a month of working, we reduced it to a day, and we basically immediately started working on features in Angular 2. And as we went along, we like moved more and more code to the Angular 2 application. Yeah, we still have to do some coding in both. We still have to know JavaScript and TypeScript, although you should know them anyway. No downtime. We literally, like, it happened not overnight, but kind of over lunch. We just deployed a new version of the application, and no one even noticed. That was a plus for us. Yeah, we didn't have any impact, or not much impact for new features. We still had some impact. Some of the team still had to learn some Angular 2 stuff. It was still new to us, so we didn't really know. But in the long run, we still had a more stable product because we had a larger part just built in Angular 2 when we actually had build checks and all the nice stuff that TypeScript and static typing can get you, and a happy client. Right, a happy client that knew he was making it's not necessarily a bad decision. It's a bad decision from a best practice point of view, right? So if you would really want to do it, it's like engineering. So you had to engineer everything. You would have done it the right way, because in that case you would have gotten a lot more stability in the long run. But the client was happy that he could move to Angular 2 fast, and that he could continue. And he actually hired people that only knew Angular 2 at some point. And they just worked on the Angular 2 parts, which was it was a really pain point for them. They wouldn't find developers for Angular 1. It's kind of strange, but yeah. And yeah, they were happy. And they're happy to pay that price even today, I think. So just still having those applications today. It's not the best. It's not the best way of doing things. It was a fast and very, very dirty way. But it worked for us. So in my case, that's the best practices way. This is the way I morally like to break best practices. I don't know if you guys have some remarks, or if you should have thought we could have done it some other way, right? I would like to hear it from you.
Why did the client did the migration?
Yeah, basically
to hire developers that.
Yeah, that was one thing. Actually, the guys we were chatting with we were working with actually from the client were technical people, and they played with Angular 1 and Angular 2, and they saw the difference, and they saw what the benefits could be if you had all the static typing and all the stuff in the project. We kind of guided them to that, to check it out. And then they say, yeah, okay, it would be really, really nice to have, like this kind of features in the project. Because in the end, they still want to develop it in like really long time, like years from now. And even if they had to fire us at some point, even if they had to fire us, they wanted to not have an application that wouldn't be maintainable or being able to be developed by other people. So that's an actual, well, in the consultancy world where you can go away at any moment, for the client it might be important to just have an easily to maintain and easily to get new people to work in the application. And Angular 2 is just better than that, than JavaScript and Angular 1. You don't have to know all the typing stuff. You don't have to like know the logic of the application to get started with something. You can just, that's my favorite thing. You can just like have something dots, you get the list of stuff that you can do. And you can't do that in Angular, at least not in that setup that we have.
But at some point, you would have to face the truth that you have to rewrite.
Oh no, that's
Angular 1 logic or
that
stuff to Angular 2, right?
Yeah.
So you have some downtime.
Yeah, but it's more spread out. Actually, that's part of what we agreed with them. Right? So we agreed, okay, we are not doing it now. We are going to do it like in between other features. So they agreed to that. They didn't agree to like, okay, we'll just like go and write Angular 2 stuff, and then the Angular 1 stuff is just going to be left. No. So we agreed that, okay, we are going to have some time to migrate. And that's what affected, that's why I said not that much effect. Right? Because in some new features, for example, what we had to say, okay, if the change was really small, we would just implement it in Angular 1. But if we had a medium to larger change to some Angular 1 code, we would just rewrite everything in Angular 2. So yeah, it's still a cost, but you can spread out that cost over years instead of 1 month. That's like right before something happens, or that's really critical. So they got to do that.
Do you still maintain this product, or it was you made this upgrade and then give it to the client and you're done?
Well, we developed the original application, and as consultants, we developed it for them, and then they hired their own development team, and at some point we worked together, and now it's just them. So we kind of passed it over, but even after the upgrade was done, we still worked on it for a year and a half, something like that. And we could have worked even longer, but politics and stuff like that. It was out of our, at least my hands, to whether or not to work on it.
I was curious about the maintenance.
Yeah.
I can do that upgrade in 1 day and don't care.
Yeah, I know.
Take it.
No. We were still basically, even after we moved it, we're still the ones that were responsible for the Angular 1 code. So it's not like we could just do it and then no. We were there with the client, developing it and doing the new features and actually moving the entire application to Angular 2 at some point, or working towards that.
Have you kept the UI router or you have switched to?
Oh, that's a nice story. Try to. For a couple of days, I tried to switch to Angular 2, and the UI. So we actually were using UI router like 0 point something, because it's kind of versions weird. And the Angular 2 version only has 2.0, and it's actually worse than the old one. It's kind of strange, but you don't get to play with states the same way. We actually had like a breadcrumb feature, where we relied on the UI router to give us the state of the entire structures of the application. And you can't do that in Angular 2. You get observables and you get all nice, like, high-powered stuff. but you can't do a simple breadcrumb of it. So yeah, we kept the Angular 1 router. Even now, I think they still have the Angular 1 router. And it's not necessarily an impediment to actually, at the beginning, we didn't know better. So we wrote even we downgraded, so everything that had to go directly into the router, we downgraded it to Angular 1, and then we wrote the router code in Angular 1. But then we could figure out that this stuff, right? So the module Angular stuff, right? That's actually just like Angular 1 code. It doesn't matter where you write it. So we just wrote it in the TypeScript files of the Angular 2 application. We structured it better than this. But it was basically right. So we would, from inside the Angular 2 application, we would write Angular 1 code to make the Angular 2 interact with the Angular 1 router.
Okay, then you don't do any lazy loading or something?
No, in this case, no. So we weren't actually using Webpack. We just had we still had we used Webpack to package and bundle our code. We didn't do lazy loading and stuff like that.
Didn't have any performance issues because of two Angulars?
No.
Big bundles?
No, no, and there's like an asterisk for that. The application itself wasn't necessarily very performance intensive. And it was supposed to be used by basically you just log in the morning and then log out at night or something like that. And it's an application for some industrial people. It's not necessarily like a thing that's on the internet and it has to have we didn't have to care about loading speeds and stuff like that. At least not that much. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, I guess he didn't like it. Yeah. He's gonna write me a bad review somewhere. It's like no.
He went out to migrate from England.
Yeah. No, he knows how to.
Yeah.
You could have waited. I'm gonna share the link. It's not. Yeah. So yeah. Have any other remarks? I would really love. So I know we're kind of done from my point of view. If you guys have any other stories like that, at least when do you feel guilty about having broken a best practice, and why would you feel guilty about that? Because it's just code in the end. No, it's our code. But so do we have anything like that? I know it's the end of the year, right? It's time to be melancholic and reflect on what you did wrong the entire year, at least in our case. So if you guys have anything like that in the discussion after, if you're going to stay, I'd love to hear it from you guys.
We can go and have some beers afterwards, so it not get...
Sadly I can't, but yeah, if you guys can do that on your own, I'm happy with it.
I think it's okay to break best practices if you understand why you do that and that you have to do that. It's like desperate times or desperate measures, right?
Yeah. But plan for the future as well.
Yeah.
So it's not only take a desperate measure without thinking of what you're going to do next.
Yeah. And understand the consequences of what you're doing.
Yep.
And as you said, let the client know.
Yeah, explain to the people that are actually going to pay them what they're going to pay for if you do some stuff. That's from my point of view, that's the most important thing. Otherwise, you're just yeah.
Can you still ask if the migration is complete now or not?
I'm sure it isn't.
Can you ask them now? Call them now?
No, I can't. Actually, no. My phone has run out of battery.
Can you keep us updated when the migration will be complete?
Yeah, I don't know. I actually can ask that. So I still keep contact with some developers there, and I will do that. But I'm really, really sure that they're not done. just because when we left, they had 2 other developers, so it's not like they had a huge team, and they had to do the features and all that. So maybe some of it is moved to Angular 2, but I'm pretty certain a lot of it is still there. And it's fine. It's not like we built Angular 1 like bad code for Angular 1. The Angular 1 application is still working. It's still fine. It's there. It's harder to work with maybe as an environment, but yeah.
After your migration, the client insisted that you continue with good practice.
Yeah, actually, well, as I said, it's not like we did bad practices before we migrated. The migration itself was a bad practice, so it's like a momentary lapse in judgment. But yeah, after that we actually did. We even before and after we had TS-lint everywhere, for example. We had automated builds, automated deployments. So it's not like we moved backwards as a development process. It's just that for this thing we decided, okay, we're not going to pay the cost it comes with moving from one framework to another framework, and we chose the fast way.
And having 2 applications running in parallel at the same time was not an option for you?
No. So it would have been. It would have still been very costly to develop parts of the application that were common. So we had like the header, navigation, stuff like that, and there are still a lot of like components that, for example, think of it, like in the navbar we had like a user where you can click and see your details or something, a modal, right? And that's still in Angular 1 when I left. It was still in Angular 1 when I left, and it's being used in the Angular 2 application. If you would have had 2 different applications from the start, you would have had to develop that part. And it's not big stuff, so it's never like big stuff. So you need to like rewrite whatever. No, but it's the sidebar, and it's the style for something, and it's whatever thing component there that we use, and it's a component there that we use, and it just adds up. So we decided to say, okay, yeah, when we actually want to change that and want to actually need them in Angular 2, and only so actually it was also kind of a rule we had. If it's only used in Angular 2, we're going to port it as well. Because we actually had like this style component, right? We had some pages that was showing tiles, basically. It's not that complicated. And we had some Angular 1 pages and Angular 2 pages. And at some point, we just migrated all the Angular 1 pages to Angular 2. And they said, yeah, we're just going to move this. We're not mad to just leave it in Angular 1, right? Yeah, so we just took like half a day more and migrated this one as well. So we went for like a sane, common sense approach. Luckily, we seem to have had a bit of common sense, not necessarily a lot of it, but worked on.
Did you know all this stuff before you were able to estimate the effort
No.
of doing this?
No. So I have worked with Angular 2 before. I have never done an upgrade from Angular 1 to Angular 2. Not even like in a test environment. So when they started asking, okay, we want to migrate, I started to play around with see exactly what the guides say on the internet, what's like actually doing one, and yeah, we figured out with like an estimate of the thing, and just the big part of just moving some code from Angular 1 from JavaScript to TypeScript, which was quite a bit of code. Yeah, just that's the bulk estimation. So it's about this much. But we didn't know it's gonna take. What we knew was once I figured out that you can just like import the JavaScript. That was like the biggest breakthrough. So when I knew I could do that, I knew I could do it in a day, and then everything else would have just been a lot more. That's how. That the cost of doing that would have just been a lot more. And we had some like other contractors that were supposed to be an expert for that, and they weren't kind of an expert, and it's a long story. That might be the subject of another presentation, maybe. So no, we didn't. The customer didn't know either, and we had worked with the customer for a long enough time for them to trust us when we said something. So we were like the ones that were in charge for the UI code. It was us. It was actually like me and one other guy. And yeah, when we said that, it's gonna be this way, it's gonna be this way, and they just took our word for it. So, other questions? No? Remarks? Tomatoes? No?
Roses?